One, two, three, four.
Welcome to Reminisce the Future, a podcast where we explore the journeys of entrepreneurs, innovators, and changemakers shaping Africa's present and future. Each episode uncovers the personal stories, lessons, and visions of those building solutions to some of the continent's toughest challenges. Today's guest is Onyeka Akumah, a serial entrepreneur whose work has spanned agriculture, real estate, and mobility. From launching Nigeria's first digital agriculture platform with Farmcrowdy to tackling housing challenges with RentSmallSmall, and now leading Treepz as a pan-African mobility platform. Onyeka's career reflects resilience, innovation, and a commitment to solving real problems at scale. He is also the author of 0 to 40, Don't Stop, Keep Building, a book that captures his philosophy of persistence and growth. Welcome, Onyeka. How are you today?
I'm fine, Abel. Thanks for having me. How are you yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm glad to have you on the podcast today. Just to
Thank
get
you.
started, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll delve into the deeper conversation.
Okay, my name is Onyeka. You've done an introduction, and I'm grateful for that. My background is in software engineering. I worked for a couple of corporates and went on to build a couple of startups. I failed in many, tried to build my own, raised a lot of money, sold some of them. Today, I'm excited about building Treepz into a world-class corporate travel platform, while also supporting founders, other founders and entrepreneurs through my community of over 450 founders across 25 countries, providing them with access to the lessons that I have learned, and then a network of investors and other entrepreneurs that have also worked out their ways through their businesses. I currently spend my time mostly in Canada and in Kenya, but I'm truly excited to be here to to share my knowledge with you and your community on on the podcast.
Amazing. And I think the best part about it is when I wanted to interview you, I saw you in Canada, and I've just moved back to Canada from Rwanda right now. And I also grew
Okay.
up in Kenya. So we have a
Oh,
very
nice.
similar background in terms of where we've been. But yeah,
Fantastic.
so you said you got started in corporate. So what was that like? How did you get into corporate? And then why did you switch over to the startup life eventually?
So I grew up in a family that had entrepreneurs. My dad, even if he was a doctor, he had his own practice, and for a very long time, at least since the early 90s, he's run his own practice, and that's what he still does. My mom pushed me also into learning the art of building businesses and creating value for people from when I was 15. So I'd always had it within me to build out. Businesses. I started out in school doing that, creating websites with a web design company that I launched then. While I worked with some organizations like Deloitte, British Council, and a bank in Nigeria called GT Bank, I always had my web design agency on the side that was helping to create websites for people and then creating value for people that was rewarding me with the compensation I was getting for that. So I'd always been an entrepreneur. Now, in 2009, I decided there were three sectors that I wanted to focus on, which is the agricultural, real estate, and transportation sector. So, in working my way through the corporate life, for whether it was for those um, corporate organizations, and then eventually working for startups, I had my eyes set on the fact that I was going to want to build my businesses eventually, 10 years after I was done with school. So I navigated my way through the corporate life and then working for startups, which gave me a lot of exposure to then help me in building my businesses.
So from corporate, you went over to the startup life, and there were
Yeah.
so many things when I did my research that I was like, I don't even know which one to ask you about. But there were some key moments, and it comes to Jumia, Congo, and a couple other key moments in the startup life before you got into your own entrepreneurship. What
Yeah.
tell us about those moments and how did you get into that from the corporate life, and then what were those skills that took you from that to doing your own startup?
So in 2010, I got approached by the first startup that I joined called Wakana. They were building out a travel agency and were looking for a digital marketing expert. At this time, I was maybe one of three only digital marketing experts that you had in Nigeria at that time on LinkedIn. So it was easy for them to spot me and then ask me questions around joining them. I got excited about the opportunity because it was one that was going to expose me to learning in a very risky environment called startups. I had always wanted to be in a startup at that point in time. So I took a pay cut and oh no, that wasn't the pay cut. I jumped on the opportunity. It had a better pay package actually. And it was going to allow me learn under a very skilled digital marketing expert. So I moved from Deloitte and joined that travel company. When I joined Jumia afterwards, 2 years later, it was because I wanted to join a very fast-growing startup that was looking to build the Amazon for Africa. Jumia later on became the first unicorn out of Africa, and it turned out I was employee number one joining that team. And the experience I got there was how to build first, how to fail first, how to raise funding, how to recruit the right team members, some remarkable people to join the company and grow the company. I also learned what was the right culture to set up in an organization and what was the wrong culture to avoid in building an organization. But I think my biggest lessons in Jumia was just understanding the fundraising journey, understanding how to meet and debate and convince investors about building a dream, understand how to bring the right people on the team from day one, and then growing a business. Joining Konga afterwards, similar experience, but more in Konga was then I started experimenting on raising my own money in my own startups. I started experimenting in building my own business. So I did my first business while I was in Konga and then left Konga to then run that business itself. It also allowed me to compete. So I had a huge budget to compete against this another startup that had a huge budget and try to win and eventually won in the marketing war between us and them. And so all that experience helped in how I developed as an individual. Then I had another stint in building another startup from ground up, but I wasn't the founder called Travel Better. I wasn't the founder, but it was put in my hands to help them launch it. Now, this
Yeah.
one, I was the only person in the team ready to now recruit the other people to join me, raise some money, and then establish what became the third largest travel agency, online travel agency in Nigeria then. So those experiences helped. The startup I did, I raised 50K, sold it for 500,000, and it didn't go according to plan. I wasn't necessarily looking to sell it, but it was either I sold it or I was going to shut it down. So there were lessons from failing in that particular startup that I then took on 3 years later to then launch the businesses in the sectors that I mentioned earlier.
And so before I want to get into that right away, but right before we get into that, you talk a lot about relationship building. Now, is that something that was important to you when you were when you were working for those other companies and startups?
Absolutely.
Okay. So it's not
Absolutely.
something that came
Yeah.
up after you. Okay. And so then how did you take that to now building Farmcrowdy? Because I know you say that it's the first agri-tech platform in Africa. So that, I mean, right now you can see so many agri-tech in Africa, but that was the first one. So that's exciting to see. What got you into that space? Like what made you get into that space?
So first was speaking about relationships. I learned that capital could help you do more than financial capital, especially when you're starting out and you're still an entrepreneur that not many people know about. And so I built relationships with the right team members. I built relationships with people that I eventually called co-founders. I built relationships with potential investors. I built relationship with the media. And all of these counted for me over time with setting out my businesses in the early days when no one knew Onyeka and no one knew what I could do in the business world. But with those relationships I had created, I was able to call back some favors. So, for instance, when I was building out the platform, I was able to call favors with the technology team to build out the platform and wait 18 months before I could pay them. That could only come from a relationship I had created beforehand that it could get me to that point where I could keep them waiting for 18 months and it allowed me to then raise money and then pay them. The co-founders I had known for maybe 5 to 10 years, and I was able to call them in to bring their own expertise, whether it's in technology or financial or operational, while I was majorly focused on the marketing bit. And then I was able to, I mean, give equity to get them excited to build with me. There was also the bit of creating relationship with the media that allowed for the necessary public relations when you launch. And you don't have all the money to pay for marketing, but you're able to get a media guy to write about you, and people start paying attention to what you're doing. So those things counted for us. And it led me into how I launched Farmcrowdy, where I used the same relationships to get the business off the ground. I was able to save some money myself from my salary of the previous company I worked for about 10 months, which became the initial capital we used. The relationships I had with a particular guy that I played soccer with on the pitch led him to introduce me to his own investor, who became my first investor in Farmcrowdy. And that led into for more relationships, helping us to unlock more funding to grow the business as a whole. So that helped me to build out Farmcrowdy, which then launched out in 2016 and started growing pretty fast because there was the agriculture move. People wanted to invest in agriculture, didn't know how to go about that. And it pretty much grew to about 400,000 farmers by the time I exited the business 5 years after launching it. And so I was super excited about the journey and what we were able to learn there.
And what was the business model with Farmcrowdy? Because I think the priority for this podcast is for me to talk about like Africa tech and the challenges that people face on the way there, right? So we'll get into that with Treepz specifically. But even before you go to Treepz and before you go to RentSmallSmall, what was it with Farmcrowdy? The challenge. Well, first of all, if you can break down what Farmcrowdy is, and then some of the challenges you had when building Farmcrowdy.
So Farmcrowdy was a crowdfunding platform for the agriculture space. What I did was I used a crowdfunding model to get people that wanted to invest in farmers but didn't want to take up hoes and cutlass and go into the farms to do the farming themselves, to do it through our platform. So we would have gone on the field to profile farmers that we could trust with resources for them to do their farming work and then provide market access for them to sell what they've produced so that everybody gets a decent return on their investment. That was essentially how it started. So with that crowdfunding platform, everyday individuals could become farmers with investing in those farmers and then watching the progress of the farm. So they're getting regular updates, pictures, videos about what was happening on the farm. They could also do farm visits and go to see the farmers if they want. And just having that impact side of the story to do good while doing well. So you're investing in farmers, you're producing more food, and also you're making a decent return once harvest comes and the farm produce is sold. So that was the essence of the model. It eventually evolved where we then created a crowdfunding platform separate from the Farmcrowdy platform. So we created two models eventually and turned the crowdfunding platform, we called it CrowdInvest, and that became its own crowdfunding channel for not just agriculture, but real estate, education, and other sectors. So that platform started out, and then Farmcrowdy then focused on the core operations with the farmers and started providing for better farm inputs, trainings for the farmers, market access for what they were producing, and while being fueled by whatever it is we're raising from the crowdfunding platform. So we created those two models, and then FarmCrowdy continued thriving as a partner for the farmers. And CrowdInvest, we then sold CrowdInvest a year later for 10.5 million dollars. We sold that as a platform out and it became its own business. And then we just allowed Farmcrowdy to continue to run. So that was the essence of the business model and how it evolved. I think after selling CrowdInvest, I then decided to resign from my role there and then double down on what we're doing with Treepz.
So
Yeah, please go
so
ahead.
if I can jump in right there, with agri-tech, a lot of times what I've heard about Africa in general is that it has a lot of virgin land, but it's not used efficiently. And by making the farmers more efficient, you're able to increase their returns and increase the money that they are able to take home. Is that something you noticed along the way when you were building Farm Crowdy? Is that something you guys focused on, or
Absolutely.
was it just about getting the funding to them?
Yeah, so the small scale farmers in Africa have between 1 to 3 hectares of farmland. If you call a small scale farmer in Canada, he has 300 to 500 hectares of farmland. So just the definition of what a small scale farmer is in Africa already tells you how much he's able to generate for himself building his farm. Now with 1 to 3 hectares of farmland that these farmers have access to, they are very, very, very um, they don't have so much access to funding to continue to grow and scale and do large scale farming. And it was a problem we noticed. There was also the educational factor where training the farmers on better farming practice to improve the yield that came from the farm was a major issue. So yes, Africa has so much land and so much um, arable land for farmers to work with. But even with the ones they are working on, they don't even have the necessary techniques to improve the yield they get from that. Let's talk of scaling that. And if you're going to scale, you would have to go into mechanized farming. And if you don't have the resources or the investment in mechanized farming to turn a small scale, a micro scale farmer with 1 to 3 hectares to move from that to 100 hectares without him crumbling, that in itself becomes a challenge. So while there's so much arable farmland, you don't have so much investment in the resources that will take advantage of that arable farmland on the continent. And that is the major problem. So what Farmcrowdy was set out to do was to channel funding now to these farmers, and over $17 million was done through Farmcrowdy to many of these farmers as a result of the platform we created, and then change them, move them from being small scale farmers to at least get growing their scale. So we had farmers that started with 2,000 poultry birds, and they moved from that to 20,000 poultry beds and
Okay.
50,000 poultry beds. So in that small level, we were doing that bit of our work to grow the platform, but it came with its challenges. It came with regulatory challenges. It came with um, cover challenges, insurance challenges. When a farm, you build out a 5,000 hectare farmland, and then a dam breaks and flood covers the entire place, and you start going back and forth with the insurance company for 1, 2, 3 years before you're able to get your cover. It just messes the whole process. Remember, the farmers need to go back to farm and do their work. And you need to be able to provide funds back to the people that have invested on the platform without, because you already had a circle that you were going to use for that. So there were those challenges that came, and it had its own things that we had to learn from and deal with as we continue to grow.
Yeah, I mean, just to relate to that, like I just said, I just moved back to Toronto from Rwanda, and one of the reasons that I moved back was we had a factory there, and we were in the wood market, and same concept. There was a fire, it burnt down the whole market, and all the people who have taken loans, they put out their own investments, they've taken other
Yeah.
people's money to grow their businesses. Now they have to take all the time to recover that money. Where do they get that money from? And insurance companies take 1 to 3 years to pay that out, so it's
Yes.
a very tough challenge with Africa. And to see, that's what I'm saying, and to see this tech coming out in Africa that's helping these people to grow their businesses, it's exciting to see. And then you moved, and then you exited from agriculture, you said. So what was now the lessons you took from agri-tech to move to real estate, which was the second, like it was very intentional. You said you wanted to do agriculture, you did agriculture. Then you moved to property. What was the lessons you took, and how did you grow Rent Small Small?
So the biggest lesson I took from the agri-tech sector was start small and then hedge your risk as much as possible, then scale. It was one of those big lessons I took. So even when we had the resources to go big on some of the projects, we chose to start small so that we could learn and improve. Because agriculture is you're putting seed in the ground, it doesn't germinate overnight. It doesn't turn into fruits overnight. It needs patience. It needs, and while there's patience that comes into the context, there's so many other things that can happen while you're doing that. So I wanted to make sure I was able to take that lesson, and that really helped as we scaled our business to get into the other sector. We had to start small and then eventually scale big. So while hedging the risk, and that helped me in how I moved into the real estate sector. Also, finding the right key members to work with was a major factor. And one of the things was I wanted to make sure I got better people I called co-founders that had strong relationship and similar core values with in building out the next business I was going to create. And then also the third thing was I wanted to focus on parts of the industry that will allow us to generate resources from day one, not the one that I will have to start waiting for the resources to come in the future. But I wanted to see that revenue was able to come in from day one. So those are the three things that I took into then starting Rent Small Small. Rent Small Small, I started 2 years after I started Farmcrowdy. I got a co-founder who had built a prop tech platform in Thailand and had just returned to Nigeria and was looking to do something with me. We got talking, we started sharing ideas. We went to the same church, and so it made it easy for us to meet regularly to after church to talk through ideas. And eventually, I saw that there was a major problem. I was about to pay my rent while we were talking and we were engaging. And in paying my rent, at that time in Nigeria, you could only pay your rent by paying the landlord 2 years' rent, or even an annual rent was rare. Most landlords were accepting only 2 years' rent.
Wow. Okay.
So you can imagine what you have in Canada or North America or in Europe or in other parts of the world where you can pay your rent monthly. That didn't exist then. And
Okay.
so while that became, I was paying the rent, and then it occurred to me that I have experienced in other parts of the world where people pay rent monthly. Why is nobody doing that in Nigeria? And then I asked my landlady the question, and they were like, oh, because we don't trust that people will be able to commit and people will be able to keep with the contract. I was like, okay, so if one is able to hedge all that risk, will you still accept? And they were like, yeah. And so we started walking around solving the problem of providing the guarantee for the landlords and then getting people to start paying, because we knew that if we approached customers to tell them to pay rent monthly, people will jump at it because they know what this is like. It makes this easier for them. But
Right.
then the landlords didn't have the guarantee that they would be able to cover that. So we started doing that, working our ways around that, putting all the necessary things in place. And that led us to create Rent Small Small. So that's the idea of the name that started, is to pay your
Right.
rent small, small
Okay.
in installments. So we then launched that out, but it has grown as a business. It's broken even. It's now profitable as a business. Before they raised their first major VC funding, the business had already broken even, and so it's grown to over 20,000 tenants using the platform, and so much more happening through the platform. Well, with Rent Small Small, it was the early days of the first 2 to 3 years of the company was where I was very heavily involved and using my resources to sustain the business until it broke even. And eventually, when that happened, I took the back seat and allowed Tunde, who is the managing director, to continue running the business. So that was how I got into the Rent Small Small
So
startup.
just a question there. That sounds like it's more of a credit reporting kind of business. If that's my understanding from what you have just said. Am I right about that? Is that it's a more credit lending or is it a property investment?
I think it's more than that. So what Rent Small Small as a model is we approach the landlords, or in the early days, we approach landlords and tell them we want to be able to bring tenants to your building, and but we will bring tenants that will pay monthly. In order to hedge the risk, we would have gone to an insurance company to provide some cover for maybe a 1 month or 2 months rent. We would have done a background check on the individuals to make sure that they're working in reputable organizations that can guarantee that this person will pay the rent. The landlord agrees. So this was how we started. The landlord will agree. We get the tenants to pay through us to the landlord. The landlord receives their rent on a monthly basis from us. So we take some risk on that. But stage two, very quickly, within a year, was we started approaching the landlords to then repurpose their apartments for short-term rentals.
Okay.
And so we started influencing the developers to create short-term, because it wasn't really a common place to have one-bedroom apartments or self-contained apartments at that time. That was built for this purpose. So we started influencing the development of these properties. Stage three was we started raising money to go and invest in the property development itself. So
Okay.
we go and acquire a property, we repurpose the entire property, and then we make it available for these short-term rentals or short or these instrumental payments for rentals. And then stage four was then we started buying properties and reselling the properties for and reselling the properties. An individual doesn't have to pay the full amount. They're able to do some kind of mortgage system through our platform to own those properties eventually. Today, the technology has evolved way more than that. It's now providing re um, credit payments, as you would put it, across other industries today. I think that has evolved as a technology. So it's no longer called Rent Small Small. It's now just called Small Small Technologies, which
Okay.
now cuts across rentals or owning of homes, or if you want to buy other things. So that's where it's evolving to as a platform now.
So that's amazing, and I just wanted to backtrack a little bit. So then, the first year when you first started, before you got to phase two, phase three, phase four, what was the revenue model there? How if you were doing the taking the risk, you were establishing the credit. but where was your revenue coming from at that time?
So when the landlords accept, say the landlord accepts at $1,000 per month the tenant should pay, we would charge the tenant maybe $1,200 because we're taking on that risk. The apartment may go for $12,000 with the landlord, but for us, the apartment goes for $14,000 and would have made, or $14,400 and would have made $2,400 from that transaction. So that was our revenue model when we first started. When we started repurposing the apartments, we started sharing revenue with the landlords. When we started buying the apartments, we started making margins on the sale of the apartments. So it just keep evolving and it's like having so much more meat in the pie.
That's interesting. And with the property space, especially in Africa, it's always a good space to get into. Now,
Yeah.
before we get to Treepz, you did a lot of work in terms of helping other startups, in terms of Techstars. I know Techstars is an organization that I've worked with before as well. So Techstars, and then you also got into investing, angel investing with other startups. Now, what was that like? Was that after Red Small Small, or when did that come about? And what was your experience with that?
So the first time I started providing mentorship to startups was in 2015. That was even before Farmcrowdy. I was providing marketing um, mentorship to founders. But once I went through Farmcrowdy, what started out with Farmcrowdy, I was recruited 3 years later to become a mentor at Techstars. And I provided mentorship for some of the founders that went through Techstars, especially those that came from Africa. At the same time, I started investing. So I started investing very early in 2016. Just putting some checks in startups that I felt I was excited about what the founders were building. But I did more between 2021 and 2022. I invested in over 17 startups. I was putting angel investing between 10,000 and $15,000 in these founders. But beyond the checks I gave them was I was providing access for them to raise further funding through my own investors that may have invested in my own startups. I would provide access for them to get that. I was also providing counsel and guidance to the founders to help them grow their businesses. Um, so I started doing that. Then I was always approached to provide mentorship to founders, and that I was doing that regularly. I found myself repeating myself over and over again with many of the founders. I then also joined the Rome Business School and started teaching their MBA students on entrepreneurship and marketing, and I did that for 2 years as well. So all of that, I then wanted to create a structured way of providing my mentorship to the founders and created a community called With Onyeka Community or WO Community. Today it has over 450 entrepreneurs, founders, investors cut across 25 countries that are all within a group that I'm able to now if I'm speaking about maybe finding the right co-founder, I can speak to 450 people at once and more people joining about that knowledge. So I started doing that and yeah, I got excited about connecting founders with opportunities and seeing them thrive by connecting with others and really practicing what I've always taken advantage of, which is relationship capital, to see that those relationships helps in creating value for these founders, whether it's in connecting them to more opportunities or creating businesses for them or opening them up to new markets. Um,
Yeah. No, sorry, go on. Go on.
yeah, then I think I just accumulated everything last year into writing my autobiography, which kind of captured all my lessons from my story into a book that will allow people to read from and get those lessons from.
Yeah, and I think it's timely because, as you said, you wanted to get into the three spaces, and now you've got into Treepz, which is the third of the three spaces that you wanted to get into, right? So yeah, take us through that to Treepz. How did you get into that, and what is Treepz, and how did you get into it?
So it started in 2019. I took a bus and I hadn't taken a bus in a while in Nigeria. But on that particular day, I took one and I was so shocked at how terrible the bus system was in Lagos at that time. And I decided I wanted to change that, starting first with providing safer, predictable, structured transportation service for um, busy everyday employees of organizations. So that started in 2019 as a bus hailing platform that we initially went out to acquire buses that people could use to go to work and come back by downloading our app and getting on those buses. It started that way. We were very popular, and then COVID, we moved about 100,000 people within 6 months, and then COVID came in and they had a lockdown, and that really affected the business because we had taken loans to go and acquire 17 brand new buses. And now this loan was running and we didn't structure it properly and we had to continue paying interest. Yet we are not moving anyone. 1 year later, once we were able to start moving people, we decided to change the model completely because at this point, there was also the venture funding drought that was being experienced that had just started showing that it was going to be a tough one. And we were pretty much at that point at the place where the margins we're making as a business from the B2C side of our business wasn't so great. We're pretty much sustaining trips with investor funds, as it were. So we then introduced a new part of our model called corporate trips. It was to allow organizations to no longer own buses and rather have their employees go to work and back using Treepz as their bus partner. So we did that and we started seeing better margins coming out of that business. And we're like, okay, let us walk around this with growing that part of the business model. So that happened. We tried to also create a marketplace for vehicle rentals. It wasn't as successful as we thought it would be. And we just saw that the B2B platform, the corporate mobility platform, or the corporate rental platform that we had created was the one that was doing well for us. So we decided to shut down the B2C business. It made us unpopular. It made us very unpopular because people felt like we were no longer in business. But we were
Yeah.
moving close to 5 to 7,000 employees across different markets. Then we expanded into new markets by acquiring our competitors in Ghana and launched Treepz Ghana. We acquired our competitors in Kenya to launch Treepz Kenya and did the same in Uganda to launch Treepz Uganda. But all of it was driven by that B2B model. So the business continued growing and we're able to break even in 2024 after going through that tough period. We're able to break even in 2024 and then decided to then introduce travel on as another layer to the corporate mobility we're providing. Corporate organizations want their employees to go to work and back with us. But what if they wanted to travel? What if they wanted to get to a new destination? We saw people that were doing the vehicle rentals did it with us only when they traveled. But that's where it ended. We didn't have anything to do with their travel, like flights and hotels. So we started working on partnerships for that and then introduced corporate travel. So Treepz today is a corporate travel solution partner that provides the complete package for organizations, flight, hotel, visa service, accommodation, eSIM services, in addition to ground transportation that we're already experts at providing. Today, we've moved 6 million people across 5 countries. We just recently expanded 2 weeks, about a month ago, into Canada, and we're replicating the same model also in this market. So that's essentially what the business has been.
Yeah, and I even wanted to get into the Canada one, but a little bit separately. Before we even get to Canada, you expanded to 4 different countries: Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and Uganda, which are amazing countries in Africa to do business in, but they're on opposite sides of the continent. Nigeria and Ghana on the west, and Kenya and Uganda on the east.
Yes.
What made you choose those specific countries, and did you find any difficulty from it being so far away from each other?
So for Nigeria and Ghana, there is just a 45 hours flight between them, and for Kenya and Uganda, it's the same. We wanted to, we started out in Nigeria, and the first market we expanded to was Ghana. And in managing both markets, because we acquired the team, that was there. They already had customers. They already had knowledge of the market. And so in the acquisition, it just was changing an existing business called Starbus to Treepz Ghana, acquiring their customers, acquiring the team, acquiring the technology, and then rolling out our own model into the market. So it wasn't really difficult. And also, language barrier wasn't such an issue with Ghana. Same happened in Uganda when we did the same thing. Now, with Uganda, we looked for a competitor that was in the market that had experience in what we were building, and we did the same thing. Same happened in Kenya. So what we then did was we created two hubs. For the West African hub, Nigeria was the major point, and then it managed Nigeria and Ghana. For the East African point, initially had Uganda as the main point, but we switched that to Kenya. So Kenya became the main hub to coordinate what was happening in the East African corridor. And then across the team, we had a lot of transitions happen between. I spent a lot of time in Kenya. I spent a lot of time in Uganda, in Ghana as well. I spent a lot of time by living there when I had to just make sure that the business got off the ground on the right footing. So it wasn't so much of a challenge. We were careful also to avoid the francophone countries because I didn't want to deal with so much around language barrier that will not allow me know what to do there. I also didn't want to go into markets that I couldn't identify a potential partner to work with by acquiring their business to represent us in that market. So that was how we're careful in our expansion. The other markets we looked at was South Africa, but we identified a partner, but it had its intricacies we weren't ready to deal with. It's such a strong market, as strong as Nigeria, and I wasn't ready to push that far. So we decided to just double down on East and West Africa, and continue to grow the business from that region.
So, and cultural barriers aside, a big thing with Africa is that there's a lot of policy, regulation, infrastructure. Those things are different across countries. The good thing is, and the reason I always wanted to do business in Africa was the regional integration, right? With the trade agreements coming out, it makes it easier to go from one country to the other. But at the same time, there is regulation issues. Is
Yes.
that something that you faced between now switching from moving from West Africa, or even within West Africa, or moving from West Africa to East Africa in terms of infrastructure and regulation?
Yeah, yes, it's something we faced, and it's something we've had to handle. I think the good thing is the team members we've had in these markets have been very instrumental in how we navigate that. So, and then we also in each of those markets had representatives on our board to help coordinate things and rely on their expertise to navigate those markets. So we were able to deal with policies, we were able to understand the regulation very quickly before we got in. And these team members helped us to really navigate on that bit. So I think the most important thing was the structure we had put in place, and the team was a major part of that structure that helped us to navigate some of these intricacies. Africa is very unique when it comes to policies, but if you're if you have a if you have your finger if you have your finger on the pulse, you'll be able to see things happening and the trends coming before they even happen. So I think that helped us greatly.
Yeah, that's essentially it. Even when I decided to move to Africa, it was kind of like I want to get my feet dirty first before understanding what the trends are. Because from Canada, it's hard to understand what the issues in Africa are, right? Which is why I had moved to Rwanda. Now you expanded to Canada. Now that's a whole different base from everything that you've been doing your whole. I mean, you worked in corporate here, but you did startups all in Africa. What was that like now, moving from Africa to Canada and expanding the business that way?
So um, the first thing was, sorry, one second. The first thing was we went through Techstars Toronto, and that happened in 2021, and we raised some funding from Canadian investors, which included um, Sunil, Techstars Toronto, bringing on some of the best investors you have in Canada to join our cap table. We got introduced also to the city of Brampton, and I met with the mayor of Brampton at that time, and they were excited about bringing Treepz to Canada to replicate the model we had here. So we had the support of investors, we had the support of a community of entrepreneurs, we had the support of the government, and but we didn't make the move yet because we wanted to be sure that we were ready for it. So the first things that happened was some of my co-founders started out by living in Canada, and they started doing with their families in Canada, and started doing some work in preparing the ground for us to launch here. For me, I had not made any move to come to Canada until early part of this year. I was pretty much focused on the other markets. And once I came in, I was able to identify where we could continue to build our business from in the region. And once that was in place, I went about putting the right resources, bringing on all the different stakeholders that had supported us since 2021 to get us going on this market, and then eventually identified some opportunities to start off the market with. We also I think because my co-founders were here for more than 2 years before the launch, it helped greatly. I think because we had the support of the government, it helped greatly. Because we had the support of the community, including investors that had invested in us in this market, all of that came together over that period to eventually allow us take off in this market smoothly.
So, what does that mean for you on a personal level? Does that mean you're now moving away from building in Africa, or is that something that you will always continue to do on a personal level?
So Treepz in essence is built for we've taken a two-pronged approach. There's Africa to Canada or to North America, and there's North America to Africa. We see ourselves as a bridge between the two continents where we're exposing Canadians to, or right now Canadians, not yet the US, to opportunities to explore Africa. And we're doing the same in Africa for them to explore the North American region. So that is the core of what this expansion is about. And it means that there will still be a lot of movements across board. For instance, we're able to we're able to get people excited about exploring Africa very recently, and that was such a huge boost for us. We're able to get people to come into Canada as well, and that's such a huge boost for us. Getting on clients to want to do that has been a huge boost for us. Um, so we see ourselves as that bridge between Canada and Africa and Canada for now, and maybe just Africa and North America eventually. And that's where we position from. And there's going to be a lot of movement across the two regions as we continue to expose people to what both can offer them.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. And now you've been building startups for the last 10 years, at least, right? In Africa, a lot has changed between early 2010s, where smartphones just came out, and the Internet of Things, and now it's become into AI. So, what have you seen about the startup ecosystem in Africa that's changed in the last 10, 15 years?
So I think in the last 10, 15 years, the penetration of mobile devices has opened up a lot of opportunities in Africa. It's we leapfrogged we leapfrogged the internet age and moved into the mobile age. I think that created a lot of business opportunities on the continent. I've also seen maybe the fourth and fifth generation of founders coming from existing businesses that have grown. So you will see a business that started maybe in 2010 and an, an entrepreneur go through that business and in 2012 joins another business and maybe in 2014 joins another business and now in 2025 they've launched their own startup and they've gone through maybe five other startups. So there's a lot of maturity in the founders we're seeing today compared to what we had before. And there's a lot of exposure. There are a lot more resources. You're finding founders now investing in founders in Africa. That wasn't a commonplace in the past. You're finding some exits, you're finding some unicorns coming out of the continent, and it continues to create a thriving ecosystem for people to pay attention to Africa seriously. So I'm excited about that. And then the adoption of artificial intelligence in its application in everyday life. I think it's exciting to see businesses employ the different strategy, different tools they can use to create meaningful businesses that create value for people. Africa is not left out. Once there's internet and the knowledge can be shared and they can access what they want from the internet, they're able to create huge solutions. And then we're seeing one-man startups now raising funding in Africa, and that is exciting because of the application of artificial intelligence. So but there's a long way from building out the models in Africa. So Africa today is still a consumer of most of the models that you are now seeing in North America or maybe in Europe or even the Middle East. And so there's still some time before we would start seeing African founders building our own models that will be unique to our own environment, climate, and customer needs in the continent. But it's early days. I think it's even early days for North America. It's early days for everyone. We don't even have regulation today for artificial intelligence in place. So it's still very early days. And yeah, but I know the brilliant minds we have in Africa will definitely still crack it and find ways to create value over time as we have systems in place to support that.
And so now so that being said, looking forward to the next 5 to 10 years for yourself, one, is there anything exciting projects that you yourself are working on? And then in the grand scheme of things, in terms of the ecosystem in Africa and what you see that is exciting for you in terms of Africa, what do you see coming up in the next 5 to 10 years?
For me, I want to double down on Treepz. I want to see how I can continue to grow Treepz into a truly global, world-class business that serves many countries, and it's expanded into other continents and regions. I want to continue to grow the business for my shareholders, for my team, and get the right kind of partnerships in place, the strategic partnerships that gives us more value to offer our customers. I think my immediate future over the next 5 years is still doubling down on trips. I will continue to support other founders, get involved in other projects in the fintech space, in the artificial intelligence space, in other sectors. I will get involved in those projects, but I will just, from where I sit today, the sole focus is just to double down on trips. The other thing I will be prioritizing is how I continue to provide support for founders through my community to get more value and to grow their businesses and with using relationship capital that we've created within our communities. That's something I will be focused on and looking to grow. I'm excited about that. I also look forward to many more success stories coming out of Africa that will continue to showcase the continent as a thriving one and an investable one for VCs and individuals looking at the continent to pay attention to and see a place where they can have a decent return on investment. Over time, I will be involved more in also how the channeling of capital moves to the continent. I'm excited about that as well, and finding how to open up more opportunities for entrepreneurs to access it.
And that's amazing, honestly, to see. Like, it's inspiring to see what you've done for yourself and what you've done also to help others within the continent. It's very inspiring. Final question before we end. I want to ask you about your book. You said you've written your autobiography, you worked on your autobiography, and now you've launched the book. Tell us about that book and some key takeaways before we wrap up.
Okay, thanks. So last year I promised myself when I turned 40 that I was going to write that book. So that happened last October, 2024. And I then decided to put the book together to capture my journey as an entrepreneur, which started first with my formation years as far back as when I was maybe 5, 6, 7 years old. I started talking about my story up until I was 20, which captured my formation years. Then from 20 to 30, it was those years I worked for other companies and worked for corporates and the lessons I learned from there, whether it was building websites or launching companies or failing in companies, whatever it is, and then working for other companies and helping them to grow and make them into household names. I captured those lessons in that 20 to 30 years. And then from 30 to 40 was when I built my own businesses and the lessons I learned from them. Over this period, I think the stories in my book have resonated with every entrepreneur that has picked it up to go through it. They see the seasons of life that I've had to go through, the ups and the downs, the highs and lows, and they're able to relate with it from. I've had people give me feedback about how emotional some of it, the things I shared were, how inspiring they were, and many people then say, oh, they now see that they're not alone in their journey and they understand what stage they are in their journey. So the feedback I've been getting has been great. I think the biggest lessons is to let people understand that if you want to be an entrepreneur, you've got to have resilience. You're gonna have seasons where you'll be so successful and everybody knows your name. Those are not seasons to waste in such. Those are seasons to continue to lay up layers on your ladder for others to climb and then be humble about it. And then you will have seasons when things are tough. Those are seasons when you have to dig deep and learn more about yourself. Because it's all seasons. You will have winter, the trees will, the flowers, the leaves on the tree will fall off. The tree looks ugly, and but its roots are going deeper. It's trying to find water. It's discovering itself because it knows that when winter is done, you would have spring again, and you will have summer, and the fruits will come back and it will blossom. But when it's also summer, it knows again that there's going to be winter. And so that's the season of life, and even as entrepreneurs, how we face the things we do. I think I tried to put all of that. Chapter 8, which talked about my entrepreneurial pain, really brought out the lessons I learned from dealing with failures. And it was one of the most emotional part of the book for me. And then talked about how one got out of that and the lessons I picked from that to then get myself back up and then to continue going as an entrepreneur and how one has had to deal with this. So I think that's pretty much the context of the book. And I hope it inspires people to learn from it and do better than I have done.
Yeah, that's an incredible lesson. I mean, if I just got rid of the whole podcast and kept that last 3 minutes, it would be enough. And that's why I want to do this. I did this podcast is because just sharing people's stories and letting entrepreneurs know that they're not alone, and listening when you hear somebody else's story, you realize that it's anything is possible, that you can accomplish the same thing. So
Yeah,
and understanding the resilience. I mean, doing business myself, I've understood the winters and the summers and the springs, the different seasons of business you have to be able to go through them if
yeah,
you want to do something successful.
yeah.
That being said, that brings us to the end of this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. Honestly, it's been exciting from what I knew about you from your research, and then hearing it from you yourself on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nabil.
And so, thank you so much.